You're tuned into Resonant Frequencies here on KissFM with myself, Wogzilla, and Kyberr. Tonight, we're here with our guest, Boz, for the evening. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. We like to start each interview with a few background questions for our listeners on Kiss. With that said, what was the initial moment that solidified your passion for electronic music?
That's a good question. I think it was the mid to late 90s, listening to classic trance, techno, especially early hard trance that really got me, got my audio senses to a happy place of just pure bliss, to be honest. It really was a special time. Just the unique sort of intense energy of the dance tracks that were produced at that time. You felt like a revolution in the dance music. It had that sort of underground feel and it was very authentic. It was a family-friendly sort of atmosphere. And that whole community was just epic. So yeah, I wanted to give back some way and I decided to become a vinyl DJ. Just to start off with.
So a few years on, that progressed. Zone Tempest was born. You want to tell us a little bit about how all that happened?
Oh, that's a very long story, but the gist of it, being in one scene for a long time, you get sort of, how can I say, you become musically narrow-minded. That's all you sort of think of. You don't want to expand out. DJing, producing. Sometimes you just have to take a break, and listening to just different music. Even attending events that you wouldn't normally do. It doesn't have to be festivals or any music-related events, just different events. Eventually, once you take a break, you end up attending unique festivals and club gigs. So yeah, me and my friends had one of those light bulb moments, and we talked about certain new artists and fresh new music, finding unique dance floor vibes. And yeah, we started listening to Psytrance, ambient psy glitch, from the very slow to the very fast, and everything in between. And yeah, you go back to the studio, you have a crack, making some new fresh tunes, and you realize you totally suck. Because you're stuck to one genre for so long, and you don't want to sort of deviate from that because that's your sort of sound. Yeah, so it was a whole new learning curve, and it felt like you had to do the whole music production process again from the ground up, because different sounds, you have different ways of processing the sounds. There isn't a set formula with Psy. That was what made it special.
There's so many different variations of
absolutely.
genre and style.
It's a kind of like an organized chaos with every producer telling their own story, and from the start to beginning. So in the beginning, like the first 2-3 tracks, you're kind of like, it's kind of make or break for the new artist, for the, starting new alias. But you get more motivation moving forward, and yeah, I sent them off to some labels and they got signed, and the rest is history. So, it was good times.
Hell yeah, man.
So you felt after, say, writing, say, 5 or more than 3 tracks, you felt that sort of pressure come off a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of like you're in untested waters, so you make those first initial tracks and you just send it off. Because you can't really get feedback because all your mates are still in the other scene. So you sort of have to...
You want relevant feedback.
Yeah, relevant feedback. But also just something different, send it off, see what happens kind of thing.
But not just that, you won't know unless you try it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how it all started. Yeah, it was a journey.
Were they labels from here in Australia that you sent them to, or overseas?
Labels, labels that still exist today. Yeah. My first release was from an overseas label as well, and then I started attending more sort of big local international brands and events, and I started to get a feel of what the locals sort of liked, and went from there really. And I started sending my music to local labels just to support the scene.
Nice. Yeah. Man. You've had a number of releases reach the top of the Beatport Psytrance charts, but most recently you have released a solo album by the name of Energies. Where did you find the inspiration whilst writing this incredible album, and how long did it take to complete?
Well, about 3 years into the Zone Tempest project, I had a lot of unique ideas with various singles, and I tried to make each track their own theme or unique story. Eventually I started thinking about how my musical influences can be presented in a way where there's something in there for everybody, not just the standard sort of formula. Not just, a bunch of Psytrance tracks with the same BPM or style, just different tracks from start to finish where you can put them all in one package and say, here, this is what I can do. this is my sort of, say, gift to everybody. I don't know. Just you feel like you're at a point where you can do that and give back. Not just record sets or make your same unique.
Internally, that would feel quite rewarding.
Yeah,
as well.
it was.
And refreshing as a producer to not make the same style over and over again.
Absolutely. So a friend of mine suggested that I should start thinking about making an album years and years back, but I didn't really think anything of it at first. The more I put it aside, the more I felt I needed to tackle it. So again, I took a small production break just to think it all over. And then each month I started making and writing and just writing down a piece of paper, back to basics, music that I normally wouldn't do or even think of. There was no set formula, right? Just a bunch of hybrid tracks that told a story with different psychedelic vibes attached to each one. So I wasn't really thinking of making each track for an album. I just made it for me a new mission for each track to be different. So by the end of year 2, I had around 8 tracks and I felt really excited to officially decide on finalizing this thing. So I sort of had to trick myself into making an album.
Oh yeah, okay.
So because if I set off to plan the album, it wouldn't have been organic. I would end up in that same production pattern again. So variety for me was critical, and it took 2.5 years to finish, and I'm super happy with it.
Very nice. I was going to say you should be, because the entire thing sounds absolutely insane.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Top-notch production.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing the idea of trying to put concept to paper first instead of going, from thought to writing out MIDI notes, for example. It's interesting hearing that.
Yeah, it's
breaking the routine, essentially.
You have to break the routine, for me anyway, just so you don't get comfortable or complacent.
A big challenge for producers is making their sounds thick and stand out in the mix. There is a major amount of depth and body to each individual element in your productions. What are your secrets to achieving such a polished sound, as we just mentioned?
Well, again, for me is, I would say, take a break from production, even if you're stuck, and if you produce long sessions. On the other hand, you can have short sessions, but often. Even if you just open up the project, fix a few things, a bit of EQ fixing, bit of compression, just a little bit, maybe 5-10 minutes here and there, literally nothing, and save an exit and leave. If you do that often, you'll come into the studio with a different perspective every time, and your ears will have time to process what you've changed. Fresh ears, even though if it's 5 minutes work, it adds up in the long run. Do the opposite of what you think is normal, especially in the studio. That's when epic musical mistakes happen, in my opinion. Trick your brain, even stand in the back of a room for a minute, or even behind your studio monitors. Think like you're at the event and imagine your track being played out. Writing is one thing, imagining in hindsight or in the future how that's going to sound on the dance floor, it's a whole different thing as well. Make mistakes, have to, just so you can make more mistakes, and those little mistakes add up to one good sound, and then lots of good sounds add up to a nice riff or loop. Then you chop and change that up, add more effects, and then all that could be for nothing because you don't like it the next day or the next week. So again, it depends how you feel on the day. It could actually make or break the track moving forward. What else? I would say have a good working relationship with your mastering engineer and get feedback often, and spend more time in the mixing process than you think is ideal. So do a little bit of mixing once the track is finished. Wait a week. I know it's a long time, but wait a week and then mix some more. Especially your ears will thank you for it later. Again, it comes back to going outside the norm. So before I wouldn't normally mix a lot after I finish my tracks, but now I'm mixing is just important as production. Even the time span it takes to mix the track. So just say you produce the track for a month, mix the track for a month. Treat it as important. Balance, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm following what you're saying.
A lot of people wouldn't do.
No way.
You'd spend, 80% of the time writing the track,
Yeah.
if 20% mixing it.
So I've changed that ratio around to 50-50 or at least 60-40.
Very good advice for people out there.
If there were 3 production tools you could recommend to other producers, what would they be and why?
In terms of synths,
Yep.
synths or plugins, any tool that you use in your production.
Well, a lot of producers use software, so I think I'll give some tips on software. I know these have been tried and tested and done to death, but they're the best for a reason. I would say a really good EQ, choose FabFilter Pro 2 or Pro 3, whatever you like. It's just my personal favorite EQ that's easy to use, good solid software under the hood. You could tell that company makes their instruments with love. They make an awesome product.
Visually good as well. And like some EQs are a bit hard to get in there and drag the notches around and stuff like that, find certain frequencies, but you can narrow in quite easily with the Fab filter.
Number 2 would be LFO tool.
Yeah.
I would say it's a really great tool for shaping how the sounds affect the kick and bass without squashing the dynamics of the sounds using compression. So you get sort of more for less. So if you squash other sounds, yeah, they might sound good by themselves, but in conjunction with kick and bass, whatever, it might not sound as good. But LFO tool can sort of carve out a niche or a space for those sounds. Depends how you like to use it.
The LFO tool would be a very good tip for a lot of producers in any genre, I'd feel.
And you can use it on any track, like kick, bass, synths, loops, anything you need to carve out and make space for. It's really, really good. This one's a bit more of a hardware kind of thing. I know I said I wasn't too high, but
we all love hardware.
It's hardware and software together, but it's mostly hardware. RME, anything with RME, you get a total analyzer, which is a software-based analyzer that you use in conjunction with the sound interface. It's really, really, really good. So all those RME people that have those hardware units, great work. Use the total analyzer. There are heaps of good analyzers out there. It's just I use that one.
You find that's the most efficient one?
Absolutely. It's very honest. See, when I bought the RME, I didn't even know that existed. I just purchased something, that was pretty good. And I found out about Tonal Analyzer about 6 or 7 years after I bought the hardware unit. So it was just a little bonus. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was kind of like a happy accident. It's awesome. So I wish I knew about it before. I would have made my earlier tracks a bit better.
It must be quite a challenge to release music regularly and also work full time. Where do you find the motivation to spend long hours in the studio?
That's a really good question. Yeah, it sure is a challenge, but I love it. Working full time and looking after 2 kids under 3 just adds to the fun. When it comes down to producing long hours in the studio, unfortunately for me, those days are gone. Yeah. I try to get around 1 hour of music production before work in the morning. Sometimes not at all. So it just depends. But usually I make time for around 4 hours per week. So as for new works, I'm working on 2 new singles at the moment and another huge release on High Recordings later this year, which details will be revealed soon.
Hell yeah. What was your favorite dance floor to play to and why?
I have really fond memories of playing at the Esoteric Festival in the last 3 years, every year.
Mate, SO setup was just insane.
It just keeps on getting better and better. Really solid vibes and just happy, fun event run by a great bunch of people. It's just a solid event.
You got any upcoming gigs?
Yeah, I got a few gigs.
Are there any that you're allowed to announce?
Yeah, sure. I'm playing at the Return to the Source launch party at the Sub Club in August. In October, I'm playing at the Elements Festival on the Sunshine Gold hinterland in Queensland.
Is that first time for that one? Or have you played there before?
I played in Queensland before,
yeah,
but I've never played at the Elements Festival. Okay. This is the first time playing there.
Heard it's one of the best ones up there.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Return to the Source in November. And a few other ones in between there that I'm working on.
A few little ones.
A few summer ones as well.
There'll be plenty of places, plenty of time to check out Zone Tempest, for sure.
It would be rude not to.
Yeah. Stay tuned after the break. Zone Tempest in the mix.